Welcome back, fellow Armchair Generals. This is Gamer1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Hearts of Iron 3 with Black Ice 8.52. Okay, well, let's continue here. We're trying to occupy Penzance now. We're moving up. Oh, we're too close, are we? Okay, let's see. I probably should have done this before we started the episode, but let's put our air back up and see what we can do now that Germany's at war with the Soviets. That means they presumably have air commitments over there. So hopefully that will allow us to better deal with this. Maybe I'll just need to attach that to a larger formation. Like I sort of said, some of the stuff I try to do is just a bit tedious off camera. And I'm one of those players that could take a long time, fiddle with a lot of the details, and just have fun doing it. But at least I know I get bored watching myself doing, fiddling with details. It's one thing to see how the battles work out, to see whether, like my invasion, seaborne invasion of Tobruk, succeeds and does well or not, things like that I can see as being quite interesting. So I know watching different people play, see, oh, well, they started that, is that going to work out? How will that do? That kind of stuff. It is fun. I didn't want to just grab all because as you notice, I'm moving to different locations here. Trying to just cover most of Britain here. Some of the weaker units, keep them away from the edge a little bit, but so they can join into some of the stuff. We've got a lot of these. Maybe they should be bigger, I don't know. Let's see how that much does. Build special warfare training camps. Money, supplies. I don't want to spend that much money on it. Not right now. Okay, there we go. We've got Penzance occupied. Here. Okay, the Atlantic Charter. Prime Minister Churchill and the President Roosevelt meet at an anchorage in Newfoundland and created the Atlantic Charter. The Charter expressed the rights of all people to choose the form of government under which they live. Yeah, in here. This is where they met. Just a little aside. Well, yeah, no, it was. Forget which battleship. I think this is it. U.S. Navy warships have showers, but as you probably know, President Roosevelt was polio or something like that. I think maybe they've eventually diagnosed it post his death as something else, but a thing that basically made his legs not function, a disease. Had been as a younger man, fully fit, and had been in the United States Navy. He was a Navy man, so he had been a fit young man. But at one point, he got the disease and couldn't use his legs anymore. And so whenever you see him standing like this, he has braces on his legs that hurt like all hell, and he sort of walks with a cane and whatever. So, but most of the time he was in the wheelchair. But I think it was one of the battleships that went for this meeting on, that before they installed in sort of like the captain's suite or wherever, Roosevelt stayed a bathtub, and that through the rest of the career of that battleship was only capital warship or whatever that had a bathtub. I don't know about hospital ships or whatever, but one of the very few U.S. naval vessels, at least at that time, to have a bathtub for the crew's use. Just a standard bathtub in like the captain's quarters or wherever, one of the officers' type quarters that Roosevelt stayed in, and he used that vessel several times, I think, to go to a couple of different things like that, and that's why they installed that there. This and Roosevelt often very much tried to form this as a war of democracy against fascism or Nazism or whatever they talked about. Which is an interesting thing, and it was a propagandistic term that I'm trying to how to put this because I don't want to be misunderstood. The right of peoples to choose the form of government under which they live. Well, the Nazis had chosen National Socialism. Now I'm not saying the Poles chose to live under National Socialism. And if you look at other sort of governments, Spain, by use of the gun, chose to live under nationalism. The Civil War. So it's not quite correct. They were looking at, they used language like that, but they were looking at democracy in and of itself is the value. And there is sort of a presumption that I think a lot of these people, I don't know about Churchill had, because Churchill was a classical conservative. He believed in, he was a parliamentarian. He believed in people's right to vote, but he also believed in a king emperor too. So, you had your right to votes within certain bounds, is what he believed. You couldn't just vote anything you want any time, where Roosevelt was a bit different. And so they were very much looking at, like I was saying, democracy itself as a high value, and they sort of presumed that if you had democracy, you would keep having democracy. And they sort of presumed, I'm talking again more about Churchill and a lot of the propaganda, that there wasn't going to be, or too much of a tyranny of a majority, meaning majority rules. How much so much, and this has gotten into at least the American culture, and I don't know how much, because I know I have an international audience, how much it is in other parts of the country. I remember as a little kid, the teacher in classes, let's vote to whatever we're going to do, and so raise hands. Oh well, the majority wins, we'll do this. Well, is that right? If as sort of which class project we're going to do, and like every day or something. Well, if the majority, but does the minority have no rights to do something once in a while it wants to do, just because the majority wants to do it? As opposed to say, oh well, 2/3 of the class want to do one thing, and 1/3 of the class wants to do another thing. Okay, well, for the next 2 days we're going to do what the 2/3 wants, and then on the third day we're going to do what the other third wants to do, so that they can also do their thing, even though if they always lose. Like if it's play a particular game, basketball, baseball, or whatever. The majority always wants to play baseball, but what if 1/3 also wants to always play basketball? Should you respect the rights of the 1/3 to once in a while? Not maybe you could say, oh well, you go, when we don't have enough people or whatever, we have to all play one game. Okay, that's fine. But maybe 1/3 of the time we do what the minority wants to do, while 2/3 of the time we do what the majority wants to do, so that, obviously, you could say, 20 different sports that people want to pick up, but you get my point. What I'm trying to talk about here is it democracy as the value, in and of itself, such a good thing? And that's what's been promoted, where before the rise of Roosevelt and the propaganda used, and it was very much used and set up during World War II, and it continued on after, the sort of sentiments that this democratic element and majority rules is a positive value in and of itself, as opposed to good governance, or the other value is freedom. Now, they did talk about freedom, but they talked more about, at least a lot of stuff I've seen, is the arsenal of democracy, the war for democracy. They keep using democracy as opposed to freedom. Now, obviously, if if you're not having to do something organized like an organized class sport, the kids can go off and do whatever they want to on the playground. And I'm sort of using this as an example because I'm trying to simplify it, not get into, I don't know, healthcare issues or something that, trying to just go at the basic fundamental question there, element to it. And yeah, as one of the recent people who posted commented that they really like my channel, like what I'm doing, sort of disappointed that I didn't get early access to be able to show the Hearts of Iron 4 stuff, but they pointed out, well, I don't always agree with your political position. That's fine, and I pointed out, I'm glad, because I don't want to just be talking to people who agree with me. So yes, this channel does have sort of somewhat my viewpoint, but I'm not trying to make you agree with all of my positions or vote the way I would vote, but I'm trying to get to sort of examine, because this is, to a point, what it's the heart of this war. We can just look at the war game of who wins what battles where, and that's fascinating too, and as you well know, I've done a lot of that in my life. But it's also the fundamental conflict between ideas here. Order on one side, if you will, but on two sides particularly, order in, the National Socialist and Fascist element, and order in the Soviets on one side, and, as I would like to characterize it, the sort of movement of freedom on the Allies side. And because if you start examining the history, and someday I'll do a Let's Play, whether it's Hearts of Iron 3 or Hearts of Iron 4, and obviously eventually a mod, we'll look at Roosevelt's presidency and how he was rather democratic, but rather unfreedom oriented. He was no fascist. I'm not trying to suggest that. But a lot of the policies would look fascistic to Americans today. Some of them, a lot of them were removed finally during the Kennedy administration. That's why there was eventually some very big economic booms post-war as Roosevelt's policies were removed, because they were highly controlling, and his belief, as well as excuse, I think it was a mixture of both, was the Great Depression in America. Europe didn't have the Great Depression. Germany may have had, massive hyperinflations and things, but Europe itself did not have a Great Depression. America had a Great Depression, and that's purely indirectly onto Roosevelt and his administration is why it was such a Great Depression. Not that he caused it. No, he came in after it started, but he extended it as long as he could. And now, saying that, he wasn't trying to make people starve. His policies were feeding people, but it was through control. And so he, like I say, he was very sort of controlling, but it was a sort of a majority, let's vote, let's get everybody behind it. He wasn't, and this is what I'm trying to talk about here, it wasn't the situation like in a dictatorship of Mussolini or Hitler kind of thing, where if you weren't of the right political party, you couldn't hold a job or other things like that. And it wasn't any sort of extreme Soviet where if you say something wrong, you're going to be put on a show trial and shot just because you said something that might not have pleased somebody. It's nothing like that. But it was a persistent attempt to persuade the American people and to use democratic means to maintain control. And so long as the American people were accepting of those controls, he was using that democratic process to achieve his goals and his ends. You can agree or disagree with various programs and his overall agenda, but that's the way he was doing it, as opposed to the talk of freedom and the fight for freedom. And I think that is a significant distinction. I think a few of the people, and maybe the poster was some of my political ideas of like my support for like the British Empire, which is also not necessarily a freedom-oriented thing, although mostly you had a certain amount of personal liberty under the British Empire, but not necessarily a political liberty. Obviously, you can see the biggest and most famous case of that is Gandhi, of course, which everybody knows. And now let's strategically redeploy them there. We'll get them there sometime this year. You had the Gandhi situation going on, which obviously was a move for political freedom of India. And again, some people, viewpoints or whatever, will disagree with you, I'm sure, and they're valid disagreements, I would say. But I would say Churchill's, the British Empire's, whatever you want to look at it, control of India, while oppressive in certain elements, and we can look at different periods of British involvement in India, but I'm right now particularly looking at sort of that, just the latter days of colonialism. The oppression was nothing like you were seeing in the Soviet Union, you were seeing in Nazi Germany, you were seeing in something like Italy. It was at least that's my understanding, it was nowhere near as oppressive. Again, the Indians weren't given the right to self-determination, and I totally understand and respect their desire for self-government. Just because I think the British government was overall a better good than what would have happened had they not been around, meaning, I know this is called the British Raj, but the sort of Raja rulers and other sort of local despots, if you will, or whatever, around India that some did still exist at this period, of course, but they were kept in check from being too tyrannical because the British didn't want to have little uprisings going on like we're seeing here. But I think the British influence is why India is as good as a good and modern a country as it is because of British influence. Whether Britain shouldn't have ever been there, I think they should have been there. I think that's a positive, like I say, a positive good. Should they have stayed as long as they did? I sort of think so. I sort of think they should have stayed longer. But maybe we got, I'm not an Indian. Maybe I'm not the best person to judge, I'll admit that, but I do sort of think that it was a positive good. But yes, at some point, the culture of India is not the culture of Britain. It is not a similar sort of thing of saying, oh, Australia, no, you're not going to be independent, but you get to send equal amount of members to Parliament for your population as you do in England or something, to have a unified, not a, you do what London says, no, you get to have votes in the Parliament and have Canada. You could have sort of like the United States of the British Empire of the, if you will, Anglo-type cultural peoples. That would be a different sort of thing. Obviously, by this period, there was more and more home rule. To this day, they sort of acknowledge the Queen as the head of state, and they do, I believe, Canada and Australia and New Zealand still have an official governor appointed by the Queen. Maybe that's no longer the case, but they have, in a de facto sort of way, they have almost no real power, and so that they're, basically independent countries. And I, again, don't blame them for wanting to be independent from England either. But Britain, because of its jealously maintained central control here in London and not allowing even, what they, their English colonials direct say in the government, sort of eventually pushed away their colonial empire themselves. That's what happened in America, because they did not allow Americans to have participation in central British Empire way back then. So they're the ones that eventually broke down their empire. But even in my opinion, for the most part, at their worst, they were nothing like the dark powers that we're seeing going on of the Axis and the Comintern. So even there, and even Churchill of his classical conservatism is looking at a more personal freedom kind of thing than there. So I see that as really what would best be a fight for freedom. It may be just freedom of national self-determination, so it could be a monarchy, a dictatorship, or something that just doesn't want to be conquered by Germany or Japan or the Soviet Union, fighting for their own country. So, this language that was really propped up that, as you can tell, sort of rubs me the wrong way and has set down paths that, obviously you tell I'm not a pro-Axis kind of guy, but still that doesn't mean that I like the direction that all these people were taking. Okay, back to the game. Gain national unity. Well, we're doing very good with unity and improve relations with the U.S. That's great. That is most excellent. Oh, good. Finding one of these. Moderate results. That's nice. Yeah, I know we haven't improved our road network, but I don't really care about that right now. How's our air battles doing? Yeah, maybe need to keep them a little more over England. Yeah, these guys shouldn't be out here. Nice to get a little picture of what's going on. Armor units. Others that it looks like, I'm guessing they're all heading east. So they've got like Gross Deutschland here defending Dieppe, and it looks like he's just going to stay there defending Dieppe, where that would be a much better unit to send the deal with the Soviets. Well, we're having some effect, but not much. You're seeing they're still well organized and they're getting chewed up. And there's a lot of them. And they've given the AI a huge boost in production ability. I know it's to make up for things like Barbarossa not being well prepared and keep the fight going. Time to go home. Oh, okay. Nope. They crossed this river. Okay, finally. I wanted them, but maybe it wasn't necessary. We were to support this attack. Yep, we're still losing convoys. There's a bunch of German subs up here still, I believe, yeah. Yeah, they're not too damaged. Okay. Let's see. U-110, German submarine U-110 was a Type 9B U-boat of the German Kriegsmarine that operated during World War II. U-110 was captured by the Royal Navy on May 9th, 1941, which provided a number of secret cipher documents to the British. U-110's capture was later given the codename Operation Primrose. It was one of the biggest secrets of the war, remaining secret for 7 months. President Roosevelt was only told of the capture by Winston Churchill in January 42, which was obviously after the U.S. entered the war. I know some, and maybe it was this one, or was maybe one of the Americans also captured a U-boat that they, or maybe both of them, that they kept the prisoners from the captured U-boat in their own special prisoner of war camp, so that they couldn't leak out information that they had been captured, and that the information, the codes might have been broken. So we'll get some espionage bonus, strategic warfare penalty. Okay. U-boat sunk a boat. Okay, well that's nice. I don't think we'll be seeing any more German invasions. We'll take this one down, but it's because the Soviets are going to keep it well occupied. I want to get those Marines wherever they are. I think they're in this stack. I think we're going to need to walk and chew gum at the same time and try to get some stuff out to the Far East as well while we're doing that. So, okay. Previously moved out most of our... These are old coastal battleships, so they're not. So here, we're in very good shape. And we're also going to send these guys back around. Making sure they don't go through the Mediterranean to get back. Need to fight. Let's crush them. Crush those Italians. No, not do this. These militia type units can be used to hold down the African Empire now, effectively, I think. Okay, well, we're going to end today's episode here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking the videos. Please post your comments. See you next time.